Thank you for joining us today at the Hawaii Women in Tech series, brought to you by the Hawaii Technology Development Corporation, HTDC, the Entrepreneur Sandbox, and the True Initiative. My name is Sarah Nanbu, and I'm the General Manager at the Entrepreneur Sandbox. A few quick introductions to the organizations behind this effort. HTDC is a state agency attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism. Their mandate is to grow the tech economy and workforce here in Hawaii. The Entrepreneur Sandbox, where we are today, is a co-working facility in Kaka'ako, owned by HTDC and managed by operating partner Box Jelly. I invite you all to come down and check out the Sandbox. The True Initiative is a joint effort among private and public sectors, together with the state of Hawaii, to encourage knowledge sharing and adoption of technology and best practices to create a resilient and thriving Hawaii. The True Initiative is an extension of the Hawaii Executive Collaborative. If you're interested in learning how you or your organization can be part of the True Initiative, please visit hdc.org/true. Now, a few housekeeping items before we dive into today's session. Today's webinar will be recorded and sent to all registrants. It will also be available on the HTDC website and Sandbox blog. Please send in any questions that you have for our guest, Ellen, through the Q&A function instead of the chat, and we'll address the questions during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. After today's session, we will email a link to a survey. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey. The team behind the Women in Tech series reads every survey response, and we use your feedback to guide the development of this series. So we really appreciate it if you fill out the survey. Now, today we will hear from Ellen Ung, Economic Development Specialist at HTDC. For those of you familiar with the series, you're used to seeing Ellen interviewing our guests. And today I have the great privilege of interviewing Ellen. Now, prior to joining HTDC, Ellen served as a B2B Development Associate for LG Mobile. In that role, she worked in Silicon Valley alongside rising startups like Box, DocuSign, and Okta. She witnessed their growth from infancy to the large entities that they are today. Ellen also served as the go-to-market lead for startups in the Singapore-based accelerator, the Co-Foundry. Today, it's known as TNB Ventures. Now, today at HTDC, she helps small, medium tech companies grow beyond Hawaii. We'll ask Ellen to share her career journey, the lessons she learned, and advice she has for women who are navigating tech roles. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ellen Ung. Thank you for letting us switch up the roles today.
Thank you for having me and encouraging me to do this. And I want to say thank you to all who have joined us over the last couple of Women in Tech series. It wouldn't have been possible without your support and your participation. So we really thank you for that and the feedback that you have given us as well.
Great. So first things first, what exactly do you do as an economic development specialist?
So that's a great question. I mean, to be honest with you, when I applied for the role, it sounded really nice. I really had no idea what an economic development specialist does. But in a nutshell, the mandate that I have to uphold for HTDC is to grow the tech economy and workforce. In this role, there are a couple of things that we look at. So I think three big pillars of HTDC in terms of how we grow the tech economy. One would be programs. The second one would be infrastructure. And then the third one would be, I would say, funding and grants. So, in terms of programs, personally for me, I managed to kickstart a couple of really interesting programs prior to COVID, or actually in the midst of, right at the start of COVID, one being the Digital Currency Innovation Lab, which, it's a lab that allows digital currency companies to come into Hawaii to conduct virtual currency transactions or cryptocurrency transactions. Through that, we're trying to understand how cryptocurrencies companies work and how we can, using the knowledge, how to affect legislation. So that's one of the programs that we look at, for example, to see if Hawaii can be like a leader in this space, the jobs that we can create through understanding this industry and sector. But because of COVID, we kind of pivoted a little bit. So a lot of our programs right now are focused on economic recovery. So getting a lot of small, medium businesses up to speed with their tech needs so that, they can ride out the wave in this pandemic. One example being like e-commerce, and getting companies who are able to sell direct to customers well equipped with their e-commerce platforms. So that's programs. We have infrastructure. The big infrastructure that we have right now is the Entrepreneur Sandbox that I'm sitting in with Sarah Nambu here as the general manager of Box Jelly, who is helping us to operate the Entrepreneur Sandbox. And the third part of it, as I mentioned, it's grants or financial aid. So we apply very aggressively for grants and a lot of other funding sources so that we can bring in money into Hawaii that we then disperse out to companies who are in need of this financial aid. So that's a long kind of explanation to what I do, but if I had to break it into three different areas, that would be it. Yeah.
Wow, that's so exciting and so interesting. What does a typical day look like for you, and how has that evolved during the pandemic?
So, well, I mean, we are not very much different from other organizations, even in the private sector. So, we are very much in the mornings, we have like team meetings and team huddles where we figure out, okay, what are the priorities for the next couple of weeks, statuses of projects and so on. However, one great thing about HTDC is the flexibility to be able to work where we want to work. So, we have a very distributed team because we do have an office in the foreign trade zone, just further down the street from here. I personally and another colleague of mine, we work out of the Entrepreneur Sandbox because we like this space a little bit better. And now with COVID, some of our colleagues actually work from home. But this whole idea of a distributed team is not new to us. We have been very familiar with, kind of working remotely and in distributed teams. So hasn't changed that much from COVID, but I think kind of more of the emotional strain that's being placed upon the organization because, like I said, our mandate is very much helping companies thrive. But instead of thrive right now, it's helping companies survive and ride out the pandemic.
And I just want to add that for those of you who have been to the Sandbox, you're used to seeing Ellen actually in this room because oftentimes she's working out of this conference room right here. So thank you for sharing all of that. Let's take a step back. And like many of the guests in our series, your career path was not linear. Could you share your career journey and what brought you here?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm not very different from a lot of people in terms of, my career not being linear, only because life happens, right? Things, you meet somebody or you have to move and switch locations or you found a better opportunity. But I think, in the midst of all of that, if I had to give, some people perspective on how I, stood firmly in terms of my career development was finding some, grounding principles or things that I knew that will always be interested in and using that to ground the way my career evolved. So I've always been interested in technology in terms of a sector or industry. In terms of market, I'm not from Hawaii, as you can tell from my accent. But growing up in college, I've always been very fascinated with Asian markets, specifically Korea. Only because, from where I came from, a lot of my, classmates, friends, family members were very much into Japanese culture and the Japanese market because it's a huge market. And there are a lot of, big Japanese tech companies. So a lot of the focus was on Japan and learning the language, learning the culture. But for me, I don't like competition. So I'm a very lazy person. So competition
I don't know if I agree with that.
is not like, it doesn't inspire me. I try to find my own niche and something that people don't really do. So it's just easier for me to stand out. So I kind of became really interested in Japan's neighbor, which is Korea, because I realized that not a lot of people knew about that country or the language or the culture at that point in time. And bear in mind, that was, maybe early 2000. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of room for kind of embracing, people who wanted to be in that country and, from the outside. So
this was all while you were in Singapore, right?
Yeah. So while I was in Singapore and I started college and, trying to figure out, hey, what's my career path gonna be? I knew it was gonna be tech. How do I differentiate myself from everyone else? So I chose Korea as kind of the market I was interested in. there was a rise in a lot of Korean technology companies like Samsung, LG. So I was like, hey, you know what? This is how I want to evolve my career and develop my career. And I just kind of selected that and ran with it. Yeah.
That's great. So then I know that, when you're talking about how are you positioning yourself, so in college you studied Korean language and Korean culture, and then you studied abroad there, and then while you were there, you had an internship. So that all set you up for success for your first role at a Korean corporation.
Yeah. So my first job, even before I came out of college, so I was, kind of wrapping up with finals and everything and started interviewing. And of course, it's a no-brainer. I applied for Samsung in Singapore, and I got the role after the first interview. And I mean, to be honest, it wasn't like I had the chops for like the entire role. It was basically IT strategy. I didn't meet the qualifications in terms of years of experience, but what they saw in my resume was very much, she speaks the language, so she can work within the strategy team that needs to work very closely with the team, or the team in headquarters in Seoul. Mm-hmm. And she has this passion for Korean culture, and she understands how Korean companies work, because I've done a lot of internships with Korean companies. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really based on showing a company that you have a passion and you're trying to set yourself up for success. I think that works very much for junior roles. If anyone here from college is listening to this, it's sometimes the companies don't really expect you to have everything, but to demonstrate other areas of interest and passion that makes you a good fit for the role and the job and the company.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially for somebody who's early in their career, who's trying to set themselves apart. Yeah. So okay, so then after you were hired for that role, then what did you do?
So I worked for Samsung for about a year as the IT strategy consultant, which was, it was an exciting role. In my team, I did a lot of project management and a little bit of business development work, but Samsung, and to be more specific, Samsung SDS, so it's actually their system integrating arm for all the Samsung group of businesses, which are thousands of they have thousands of subsidiaries across the world, but my team focused specifically on Southeast Asia and Oceania, which includes Australia and India. So I spent a year there learning a lot about, project management and kind of information systems and architecture. And also, working alongside with some of the best consulting firms in the world, which kind of set me up for the role, after, but we can talk about that later. But so I worked for LG for about a year, and then at the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to do a PhD. Mm-hmm. So I went back to school and started on my master's, actually. Yeah.
Huh. Great. Yes. Okay, so then what did you do after your master's?
So after my master's, I was actually headhunted and scouted by someone that I worked with when I was in Samsung. He had been headhunted himself to lead a team over in LG, our competitor, LG Mobile in Seoul. And he was like, hey, I've worked with you before. I think, you have potential. I really enjoy working with you, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to join me in this new team that I'm forming? And I know that, and again, I think another thing maybe, to leave with the audience is never be shy to share your career aspirations. Like, just tell everybody what you like to do and what you want to do and what you hope to be doing in the future. Because if you plant that seed in people's minds, unconsciously or, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, sometimes they remember and then they come back to you if they see opportunities. And it has happened for me in almost most of my career journey, actually. So this person that I worked with back at Samsung, he was from McKinsey, actually, and consulting. And he was headhunted, but he knew that I always wanted to work in Korea. And he think that it was a good fit. So he extended an offer. And my professor at that time, I was wrapping up my master's. I was just left with the thesis, but he was like, this is a great opportunity. You should go for it. You can always do a PhD anytime. So I was like, okay, if I got your blessing, I should just run with it. So, I went for the interview and I got the job, and I relocated to Seoul after that. I mean, that was kind of like one of my life ambitions. So I was glad that it kind of came during the master's program. But yeah, so
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to talk about the value of networking. I think oftentimes networking gets a bad rap for being like sleazy or something that people don't like doing, but the way you shared how you genuinely expressed to people in your network what you were interested in, what you were passionate about, and how that then led to further opportunities in the future. So that's great. That's great advice. Yeah. Okay, so now at that role that you were in when you moved to Seoul, that gave you the opportunity to interface with startups in Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, so my experience, I would say, if I had to put a pivotal moment in my career, it was my time at LG Mobile, and it was a great learning experience. There was a lot of exposure to different markets. So, you know, as you mentioned, Sarah, like I worked with startups in Silicon Valley. I did that for about a year and a half. I did about 6 months in our Beijing office as well. And I did a whole year in our New Delhi office in India. So for me, it was very interesting being able to work with different cultures. But kind of back to your question, yeah, I mean, the 1.5 years working or representing our headquarters, you know, and going back and forth to our Silicon Valley office kind of opened my eyes to a whole other tech, you know, industry that I wasn't aware of, which was the startup world. And I think that kind of, I would say, you know, if I had to think back, kind of laid the second part of my career path, and getting me excited about, oh, you know, life is not just about working for a large conglomerate, but you can make a huge difference, as we can see with like Airbnb and all those IPOs coming out. Like, you can change the world with a startup and with a single idea if you can execute it properly.
Yeah, that's such a journey that took you all over the world. And we kind of touched on this, but we all know how glamorously Silicon Valley is portrayed on TV and in movies. What was your experience working alongside these unicorns like Box and DocuSign and Okta? I'm especially interested, as you touched on your perspective, because you were coming at it from a very corporate perspective.
Before we get to that, for those who are not aware, there is a Korean drama on Netflix right now, and I'm a Korean drama junkie. So there's a Korean drama on Netflix called Startup, and the accelerator program in that drama is actually called Sandbox. You know, and here we are sitting in the Entrepreneur Sandbox in Hawaii. But if you're interested to understand a little bit more, or, you know, kind of an overview of the Korean startup scene, which is very dynamic as well, make sure you check out that drama. You have romance in it, but you can also learn a little bit about startup world. Anyway, back to your question. Yes, so in my role when I was at LG working with startups, it was a strategy/business development role, and there was also a little bit of technical project management in there. Only because, you know, as I mentioned, like, I did a lot of, you know, traveling back and forth from the Korea office, the headquarters, and in Korea to the Silicon Valley office, only because I think, number one, language, the ability, you know, because I speak Korean, so the ability to converse in different languages and to translate the needs and the requirements on each side, right, and bridge those cultures is actually something that people don't really think about, but it's probably like one of the skills that I had that enabled me to fulfill that role. But because of that, you know, I was involved in a multitude of projects, from like a business development, which is sourcing startups that had promising applications that, you know, could complement LG's mobile phone portfolio. And to be specific, I focus very much on enterprise phones, so phones that we could sell into companies. So we were trying to replace the BlackBerries of the day at that time. And also, you know, when I talked about technical project management, it's very much, you know, if we are working with, for example, one of our big companies that we worked with, it was VMware, where we were trying to do like a virtualized mobile phone. So kind of figuring out, what are some of the technical needs on that side, and how does that translate into integrating it with LG mobile phones, right, on the engineering team side. So that required some work. But I think for me, what was really exciting was, you know, like you said, working with Box, Okta, DocuSign, all of them, which were less than 10 people startup at that time when I met with them. And now they're like listed, right, on, you know, the stock exchange. So they have done really well for themselves. from when I've met them. But from a corporate perspective, I think, if kind of taking that knowledge and experience and bringing it to whether I was at an accelerator in Singapore or here, it's, always trying to make sure that the startups are protected, because from my experience, I know how big companies work, right? It's take all you can take, of course we want to help the startups, but at the end of the day, it's how much can we extract or how much value can we get from these startups? So as a startup, I think when you are working with larger companies, don't forget the value of your IP. And I think one thing that's very important that a lot of startups try to save money on is legal, right? Because legal fees are expensive. They think, it's not super important right now, but I want to emphasize that an agreement that you sign with a large company that has a huge legal team behind them, or anything that's verbal, even if it's written on like a napkin, right, can become detrimental to you if you don't run it through a proper legal process. And that being said, just kind of I want to put a shout out there for HTDC. We do have a legal aids,
the business law course clinic, which is operated both out of the Sandbox as well as YWCA.
Correct. Thank you for knowing our program there. But yeah, so we have that. So again, if you're a startup out there, you're listening into this, just know that HTDC has services like this. So if you are short on financial resources for any legal aid or assistance, reach out to us. But I want to emphasize that, as a startup, you have options. You don't always have to work with just one large company. Make sure you know all your options before you decide, who do you want to go with, right? I think just to make it, it might be interesting for some people out there. So we actually LG worked a lot with Box only because, and it's all in the press, so you can go search for it. Samsung was working with Dropbox, right? So again, LG and Samsung are competitors. Dropbox and Box are competitors. So I think kind of understanding the competitive landscape and who you want to align yourself with might be really helpful as well, on top of whatever you need to know from the legal perspective.
Yeah, and in your current role, you work with a lot of small businesses. They're established, so they're not startups, but everything that you just shared is applicable to them as well. That's great advice for not just startups, but for small businesses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, right, understanding the value that you bring in your IP is very critical, right? Because, and how much of the IP is replicable, I think, if I put it that way, because sometimes, when you work with large companies, they can take your IP and tear it apart very quickly, especially if they have a development team that's behind them, right? And I'm not saying that all large companies are like that, but I'm saying that you just have to be very conscious of what you share from a technological layer perspective and what you don't share, right?
Yeah, all of that is really great advice. I want to transition a little bit. So you had this career and this role that was taking you all around the world. You were traveling back between Seoul and Silicon Valley. How did you end up in the middle in Hawaii?
It was love.
Oh
no, yeah. So I met my husband in Silicon Valley through my boss, actually, and yeah. So he wanted to move home to family, and that's why we came.
Got it. And so obviously, Hawaii doesn't have the same international tech and startup ecosystem like Seoul, Silicon Valley, Singapore. How were you able to translate all of those skills into the market here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, to be honest with you, I think after I moved here, it was hard. Emotionally, it was hard because, giving up a career, an international career with a lot of exposure to something that's much smaller. So I think for me, it was kind of struggling with coming to terms that, I'm not going to have that kind of international exposure again after coming here. But, kind of taking a step back and thinking, hey, if I had to restart my career, what would it be? And it just kind of brought me back to college days or pre-college days, right? Like, what is interesting to me? What kind of skill sets do I want to develop within this sector or industry, right? And again, like I said, technology is evolving all the time, and it's so big, right? Intersects across all kinds of businesses, that if you, depending on how you want to maneuver, there's always a space for you to do a tech-based role. But for me, I think, I'm very much, my skill sets were very much in business development and strategy work, which wasn't a lot, to be honest, here in Hawaii. So I knew that, oh, you know what, I need to develop some functional skills. What kind of functional skills would be exciting for me to look at? And it kind of was serendipitous, if you put it that way. But at the same time, I was like, oh, I've always been a big fan of shopping. When I was in college, I actually had my own, like, we call it a blog shop, but it was actually like a very, e-commerce platform 1.0 kind of thing.
Right.
So I was importing a lot of Korean apparel and selling them so that I could use that money to like buy my own Korean clothes, if that makes sense, like to fund my own shopping. But yeah, so, I knew that, hey, you know what, I really like e-commerce and I like digital marketing. Is, maybe that's something that I could look into, right? And it's still very tech-based. For people who don't think digital marketing is tech-based, you're completely wrong. I always call a lot of roles in digital marketing as unicorn roles because you kind of need to understand aesthetics, but you are always really good at it if you understand the technical aspects of it as well. So, I knew that I wanted to do something in that space, and it was kind of looking for the opportunity, which kind of came with, for people who are local, you will know this company called Watanabe Floral.
Right.
Yeah, so I kind of started my career with them.
Right. And I know a little fun fact about how you got your role at Watanabe Floral. Could you share that story?
Yes. So I was planning my wedding at that time. And, I was Watanabe Floral being a wholesaler and me being like a chief good deal officer. I wanted the best prices in town. So I was looking at Watanabe Floral because they're wholesalers. So I knew their prices were cheaper than other places on the island. So I kind of reached out to them and said, hey, I want to do my wedding flowers, blah, blah, blah. And so at that time, unfortunately, the customer service wasn't the best. So I didn't get the best customer service. And me being someone fresh from outside of Hawaii was like, why are things like this? So I just wrote to the general manager and said, hey, like your customer service is not great. These are some of the things you need to change, right? And because of that, we had a conversation about certain things, about the business that I thought they could do better. And we just left it as it is. I worked with their wedding coordinator on my flowers. But I then saw that they had an opening for a sales associate position. And again, I think that's something that we can talk about. But, at that time, I was more in the mindset of, okay, I'm taking a little break from work. Flowers are part of my passion. Like my dream was always to be a florist. So I was like, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll just work in a floral store and see if, if it's interesting enough for me to pivot in my career or something like that.
Yeah.
But I applied for the role, and the general manager remembered me. And he was like, hey, I know you have all this great skill sets. We are in the midst of improving our e-commerce platform and digital marketing based on like some of the feedback that you get. Do you want to work with us? We'll create this role for you. And I was like, well, the icing on the cake was 25% off my flowers. So I was like, of course, yes. Yeah, so I took on that role. And I think on hindsight, it was interesting only because the company is a great company, but it's a little bit, I would say it's not as modern as the companies I work for. So it was the first time I had to like clock in using a manual like paper card, and stuff like that. But I think the exposure that it gave me in terms of developing skill sets was tremendous. So, I think for people who are moving from one place to another location and trying to figure out your career path or your life path, I think just be open to different opportunities, even though they may not seem as glamorous from the beginning. I think you can kind of think of it as, oh, what can I learn from this? And how can I use whatever I'm learning to take me to the next level?
Yeah, and it also seems like you found a great opportunity to apply what you learned previously into that role and helping this Hawaii-based business transform and become more modern.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? I think for me, another thing, like, on top of whatever I knew I wanted to do with, like tech-based stuff, I knew that I wanted to help companies transform, right? And be less archaic and be more modern, and to be basically optimize their business processes. So kind of that, having that in the back of my mind helps me to position myself better when I'm talking to companies, right? Because then you're showing with my skill sets, how am I able to help you improve?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, depending on what your skill sets are, I think, figure that out, figure what your passions are, what your interests are, what your skill sets are, and how you can take that to a new market and create your own niche.
Yeah. That's great. And then I know right after your time at Watanabe, you got into another really fun industry, also helping them digitally transform. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So other than flowers, I really like luxury, diamonds to be specific. Well, I mean, it was interesting for me only because that business was a diamond wholesaler, and they wanted to go to B2C, right? So business to consumer. They wanted to sell directly to consumer, even though they were a wholesaler. So for me, number one, there's this ethical dilemma, right? Because if you're a wholesaler, you're not supposed to be selling to customers. So how do you navigate that? But at the same time, it's, the processes of being selling, as a wholesaler versus direct to consumer business is different. So, again, helping them navigate that, kind of the transformation. And setting up, and refining their e-commerce platform, helping them refine. I did some of their digital marketing, but I think more of my focus was very much on the e-commerce side as opposed to digital marketing. But that was a great experience. I learned so much about consumer patterns and buying patterns when it comes to luxury, right? Especially in the Hawaii market, it's a little bit different. And then I had to learn about diamonds and the diamond grading system and so on. So again, I walked away from the experience learning just a lot about another industry. Yeah.
It's great. While also developing your e-com skill set.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did you go from diamonds and flowers to working for the state?
I know that I wanted to do something on a larger scale, like using my skill sets to benefit a larger population, if that makes sense. So, I was looking around for jobs, and I saw this opportunity with HTDC, and I was like, hey, this sounds like something I could do. Like I said at the beginning of this session, like I didn't really know what an economic development specialist is, but if it means helping businesses in technology, I was like, yeah, I think I have something to offer. So I applied for that role. But I think what was interesting was the fact that, again, I don't know if you know, Sarah, but I wouldn't have gotten this role if not for someone I knew outside of, within my network, right? That encouraged HTDC to interview me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So again, like I said, don't be afraid to tell people what you want to do or what you aspire to do.
Yeah.
Because, you never know. People have connections, and then you can and you see the right role out there, and you think you're a good fit for the role, you can always reach out to your connections and tell them, hey, you know what? Your time to help me has come. There's something out there that I really want, and I think I'm a good fit for it. Can you put in a word for me, right? So I got, I interviewed with HTDC. I mean, it wasn't easy. I mean, I wouldn't say like, oh, I just got the job like this, but kind of leveraging my experience, some of the people I knew, to position myself as a great candidate for this role.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I didn't know that story.
Yeah,
That's great.
I wouldn't have been interviewed if not for someone else. But
right. So again, the importance of building your network and maintaining those relationships.
And I think for people who are new to the island, especially, like I'm not from here, you want to try to get to know as many people as possible, right? And I think Hawaii is a great place because people are naturally curious about people who are not from here, but they're only naturally curious if you can tell them like why you're here and what do you have to offer, and like, kind of your how do I put it, in a very genuine way, like how you want to help Hawaii, right? Or what are the things you're doing right now that's helping businesses in Hawaii, right? Or helping the community in Hawaii. It doesn't have to be always corporate or transactional, but even if it's in a nonprofit world or anything like that. Try to get to know as many people as possible because, Hawaii is so small that everyone is like connected in some way. Yeah, it's not like, like Silicon Valley where I think merit is more, I would say it's more critical. Like you have to go through like a paper-based process sometimes to get a job. But here in Hawaii, there are a lot of ways to get a job. Let's just put it that way. Yeah.
I think one thing I'd add to that is that I think when you're able to position yourself and say what your interests are, it makes you more memorable to the person that you're talking to. So they'll remember, oh yeah, Ellen's interested in business development. She's worked in small businesses. She has this skill set. So then when a job does come up and you say, hey, I think this will be a good fit, they can be like, yeah, those are all the things that you said you were looking for.
Yeah, and even like my job at the Diamonds place, that was a contact of mine who saw it on Craigslist, and she just texted it to me over. She was like, hey, I know you love shopping. I know you love like luxury stuff. You might be a good fit for this role. And I was like, cool, thanks. Let me check it out. And that's how I got to know about the job. Like, because I don't go on Craigslist. She was the one who sent it to me. So there you go, right? So again, like almost everything is, kind of through my network of connections and friends and yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So I want to transition a little bit. So, you've shared your career path, and you've shared how you've pivoted in different markets, in different for different roles. How have you continued to grow your skill set? Because in each of these roles, you've needed to learn and develop new things. How do you learn, and how do you continue to learn?
Yeah, so I'm a naturally curious person. I'm very curious, and sometimes I bite off more than I can chew. But I think one of the good platforms out there that, again, through this whole pandemic, HTDC had a program with them. It was called Coursera. I spent a lot of time on Coursera only because I'm very interested in data. So, kind of learning about different platforms to manipulate data or present data or visualize data. I use Coursera for that. And I mean, it's, it was free because of a program that we had under HTDC. But I mean, even before that, I was actually paying for like a monthly subscription. But I think it's great because depending on what your career aspirations are, and if you want to like switching roles or, going to a different kind of functional role within your industry, I think you can use that as a stepping stone to show interest, right? I'm also very much, I'm also very passionate about data privacy. Protection, governance, and so on. So, and I have no idea why, but I decided to do my PhD. I felt like this is the right time because I gave it up, years ago.
Right.
If I don't do it now, it might be a little bit too late because it requires a lot of stamina, right? So using kind of that logic plus, my interest areas, I kind of embark on this new journey on the side with my PhD, but looking a lot at data privacy and protection and governance as well.
Wow. And yes, for everyone who doesn't know, Ellen is getting her PhD, and she wrapped up her semester earlier this week. So she's on winter break, and we want to congratulate her on finishing her first semester.
Survived the first semester.
And so I love that you find ways. You mentioned you're naturally curious, and you find ways to learn and augment your skill set through traditional means, going back to school, as well as non-traditional means through Coursera and online learning. What about other ways that you continue to learn and develop skill sets?
Yeah, so I think another thing that was interesting, at least for me during the pandemic, I mean, like work was super busy, and HTDC had a lot on our plate, but I think, just to kind of get my mind off, the whole pandemic related stuff, right? Well, maybe, but at the same time, we had a lot of technologies coming up with regards to like, tracking, because, we want to make sure we knew where people were, where COVID infected people were, or like surveillance, right? In other countries that were using technologies like that. So, kind of on that basis, with that as the context and my interest in data privacy, I was just very keen on understanding, what are the implications for that, and how is that field of data privacy going to change with, the pandemic, right? And all these technologies being applied. So, and how data privacy as a field was going to grow, right? So, I actually did a lot of reach out via LinkedIn to data privacy officers, data governance officers on LinkedIn, for like some of the world's biggest companies. And surprisingly, with questions, of course, like, oh, what do you think about this? Or can I get your thoughts on this? Blah, blah, blah. And to my surprise, people actually answered, right? And some of them even offered to jump on a call to talk about it or to share their perspectives on the field and how it was growing. So, I think that's another way to learn, like a very non-traditional way to learn and to network. And again, putting yourself out there, not as an expert, but I'm curious about this. I want to kind of grow my knowledge in this. Can you help me?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's so great that even, while people are stuck at home and working from home, you're able to show that it is still possible to grow your network as well as to find mentors in an area that you're interested in. Mentorship has come up a lot in this series. A lot of our guests have shared how mentors have helped them through their career. So I'm wondering, what advice do you have for someone who's interested in finding a network of mentors to help them navigate their career?
That's an interesting question. So I've never had a lack of mentors, only because I think, like I said, I'm a naturally curious person, so I ask a lot of questions. And I think another thing to think about is, the people that you worked with or working with. Maybe as the people you're working with right now might be easier to get to as mentors, but people that you have worked with, especially if you're an experienced professional. For me, I keep a running tab of all the people I've worked with and people that I go to for advice for different things, right? So I make it a point to check in with them at least twice a year, like every 6 months, just to see how everyone's going. And what's interesting for me is people, your mentor's career change and evolve as well. There'll be times where you never know, like you could be someone who could offer them some help or advice, right? Or perspective, if you put it that way. So, reaching out often helps to kind of cement that connection and a relationship. So that's one way I kind of, keep my mentor network, fresh. But at the same time, like I said, like on LinkedIn, people are always willing to talk to you and help you. That's why they're on LinkedIn. But you just have to make sure you're asking the right questions to the right people, right? And you do your research about that person. Like for me, for some of these people, we are on LinkedIn and connected, but I connect with them on other platforms as well, like Twitter. That helps us to interact more frequently, right? As opposed to LinkedIn, which is, a little bit more serious. In Twitter, you can do one-liners to each other, right? Or you can give a perspective or like an opinion. Some of them are even like on, Instagram. So because they want to share their personal life. So, if they're on Instagram and they're open to sharing their personal life, connect with them on Instagram, right? So I think it depends on, what kind of people you're interacting with. But I think there's no lack of access to people out there that you can call mentors, even if you don't know them.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. One interesting conversation that we had about mentors was also about finding people whose value systems align with your personal values. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so I think, like right now I'm kind of obsessed with investing, right? Investing as a woman, not just, in like just throwing your money out there, but like what are some of the value systems that guide me when it comes to investing? So because of that, I look to a lot of women-based investing platforms and services. And again, through that, I'm exposed to a whole new world of women investors and women investing, right? Or women who want to better their financial kind of status. So I think on that note, I actually managed to meet a lot of women who are like-minded in terms of, like I want to be an entrepreneur, or I want to be, financially independent, or, I want to invest in industries or companies that support women, or, whatever your values are, right? So I think for me, as I grow older, my value system actually becomes more important in shaping some of the decisions I make when it comes to interactions with other people, my goals, and even my career development.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's actually a great segue to my next question in this next section.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, the Women in Tech series is actually Ellen's brainchild. This was her idea. She helped develop this series. Could you share more about why you did that? Obviously, it aligns with your value system, but I know that there's more behind it. So could you share that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that, this whole Women in Tech series, it's not new. It's not a new concept, right? Like a lot of places have done it. A lot of organizations have done it. Even in Hawaii, we do have other like women in tech groups and so on. But I think the main motivation for me, kind of doing it was, we celebrate a lot of female entrepreneurs, which is great. Female CEOs, great, right? Like, I love that. And the advice that they share, the knowledge they share, the wisdom that they share, it's great. But, sometimes for them to get to where they got to, a lot of the meat of the struggles and the challenges they face are forgotten. That's number one. And, I'm trying to capture that by interviewing women who are getting there in a way. Another kind of perspective is, women in tech-based roles, they're making a lot of changes, right, across the organization without really being recognized for their contributions. So you don't necessarily have to be a CEO of a tech company to be recognized. You can be someone within your company, within a team that's making a huge difference that people don't see. So I want to kind of like showcase that as well, and highlighting all the different tech-based roles that women are playing across the industry, across like companies here in Hawaii, and taking that opportunity to let people learn more about technology, right, and what these roles entail. It's not always about coding or development work, or people sometimes have this very kind of limited view and perspective of what technology is or what a tech-based role is, but it's not. Like I said, technology intersects with a lot of things, right? So a technology-based role can be a lot of things,
right?
And we want to take this opportunity to share with, the community here in Hawaii.
Right. And as you've shown in your career, you can have tech-based roles in non-technical industries, like diamonds and
flowers. I mean, I've moved from IT strategy to marketing, to sales, to business development, and then now to e-commerce, digital marketing, right? And I've known a lot of women who have gone from purely, I would say, designer or kind of artistic based tech roles like UX UI over to pure coding and development, right? So the spectrum is huge, right? And you can shift how you want to by learning, and picking up the skills that you need.
Right. Well, I'm so glad that you're passionate about that, because I love this series. So I'm glad that it exists. I do want to do a time check and take a peek at the Q&A just to see if we have any questions from the audience. We have a question from Vince. How can Hawaii improve its IT landscape to become more competitive on the world stage?
That's a big question. So, like I said, we here at Hawaii, we do have, programs that we run with Coursera, that we were running with Coursera, that as a pilot, just to understand how we can improve, the education behind technology. Mm-hmm. But I think there's so many levels to it, right? There's technical education in schools, from elementary where it's STEM all the way to colleges where it's we actually take it as a major, right? And then what HTDC is interested in and what we focus on is not on the STEM side or college level kind of technical education. We are looking very much at how do we help people learn new digital skills. That's where we focus on, and that's why we look very closely at platforms that enable people to pivot, like Coursera, like LinkedIn Learning is another one that's growing. So how do we take that and how do we set it up so that it's a systematic way of helping people not just to learn? Learning is one thing. What is awaiting them at the end of that learning is another thing, right? So you put all these resources into studying and all these technical skills. Are you able to get a job? That's the big question. So how do we create that bridge between learning all this and the career opportunities that's awaiting them, right? And I think one thing that's interesting about this pandemic is that it's opened so many possibilities for remote work opportunities, right? And that, you know, before COVID, I think it would have been an uphill battle to get people to think big, because one of the biggest problems and challenges that people always have here in Hawaii, two things, right? One, from the company perspective, is we don't have enough talent. Yeah, maybe, because, you know, you guys are not really paying the salaries that to hire the best talent. The other problem is, you know, we don't have enough jobs here in Hawaii, technical jobs or technology-based jobs. So why am I going to technology, right? But with this pandemic, I think we can answer that question. There are a lot of remote work opportunities out there. Companies are being more open to hiring, even if you're sitting in Hawaii, right? And then for companies, that hopefully would, you know, create or incentivize and motivate people to pick up digital skills. And we have been seeing an uptake and a rise in that actually over the last couple of months through the Coursera program. And hopefully, as we get more people equipped with better digital skills, companies here in Hawaii would then have to start, you know, kind of competing for this talent. Right. So I don't know if I answered your question, Vince, but yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a large problem, and your work at HTDC is helping to solve
a part of it.
Yeah. Okay, well, we actually, our conversation ran very long, so I'm going to wrap things up. And Ellen, as you know, before we're going to let you go, we have one final question for you, and it's, what's the one word you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Yes, so that's my favorite question, because I think it encapsulates most of, if you have watched our interviews, it encapsulates the person. So I think for me, my word would be courage. And I think I chose that word because, well, courage, you know, the root word in Latin for that is from the heart. And interestingly, I found out recently that, you know, it's very much in line with this whole idea of vulnerability. But I think for me, courage is really, yeah, like, you know, from the heart, understanding what you want, right? And your passions, your interests, your desires, and taking it and running with it so that you can, you know, meet that and, you know, meet your passions and your interests and your wants. So I think for me, courage was a big part of all the different leaps I've taken across my career journey. So I would leave the audience with that word.
Love it. And what a wonderful way to wrap up 2020.
Courage.
Yes, love it. Thank you, Ellen, so much for speaking with me today and for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Even though I self-invited.
No. We had to convince Ellen that December was her turn to come on here and let us interview her. So thank you so much. To all the attendees today, today's session has been recorded, and we'll share a link to the recording in a follow-up email. That email will also contain a link to the survey that I mentioned. We appreciate and value your feedback, so please fill out the survey. And lastly, please help us kick off the Women in Tech series in 2021 on January 20th for our interview with Akemi Hyatt, Chief Marketing Officer and owner of Hidden Gears, a Hawaii-based e-commerce and digital marketing firm that ties so nicely into everything that we talked about. Please register through the link that's going to be shared through the chat. Thanks, everyone. Please stay safe and happy holidays.
Happy holidays. See you in 2021.